On the morning of 15th of December 1900, the three keepers of the Flannan Isle Lighthouse made their final entry. Supposedly it read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." It was only 11 days later, on Boxing Day of 1900, when the duty relief keeper arrived on the island, that the now 124-year-old unsolved mystery was first realised. For the lighthouse was found deserted. The clocks had stopped, a single oilskin hung by the door, and the three men were nowhere to be found. Frightful as this discovery was, it is what came after, the theories of incensed murder, freak storms, and even of supernatural interference that ensured the enduring legacy of this enigmatic tale. So, what became of the three lighthouse keepers who disappeared, without a trace, from this woeful, weather-battered island? Tonight, we recount the legend of the Flannan Isle vanishing. Three men dwell on Flannan Isle to keep the lamp alight. As we steered under the lee, we caught no glimmer through the night. Shortly before midnight on the night of December 15th, 1900, a steamship by the name of SS Arcta passed by the Flannan Isles. As Captain Holman glanced out across the frigid waters in the direction of Eileen Moor, the largest of the Flannan Islands, and home to the fated lighthouse, he was met with nothing but the blackness of the night staring back at him. For a man who had spent long and often treacherous periods of time unmoored atop deep and desolate oceans, little gave him comfort and solace more than the hazy, burning glow of a lighthouse. As such, the unforeseen absence of this guiding light was starkly realized. And so, the lighthouse remained in darkness for 11 days, and the waters that surrounded Eileen Moor were left to be illuminated only by the sullen winter moonlight. The Flannan Isle Lighthouse is located upon the highest point of Eileen Moor, a small island found nestled within the uninhabited Flannan Isles, also known as the Seven Hunters. The Flannan Isles are situated within the remote Scottish Outer Hebrides, a crescent-shaped array of islands found over 65 kilometres from the Scottish mainland. Whilst today, island-hopping sightseers can tour even the most isolated of the Outer Hebrides, those same rocky trails were left entirely untrodden back in the 19th century. It is of little wonder, therefore, that the puzzling disappearance of lighthouse keepers James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur went undiscovered for so long. On Boxing Day of 1900, the relief vessel Hesperus arrived on the Flannan Isles. Amongst those aboard the ship were Captain Harvey, master of the Hesperus, and the relieving keeper Joseph Moore. Upon arrival, they found none of the usual landing preparations waiting for them. In an attempt to call the keepers, Captain Harvey blew the steam whistle and the siren, and even fired a flare. All to no avail. A boat was lowered and sent ashore to the east landing with Joseph Moore, assistant keeper. When the boat reached the landing, there being still no signs of the keepers, the boat was backed into the landing, and with some difficulty, Moore managed to jump ashore. Moore was greeted by a silent lighthouse. The beds were empty. The kitchen was left in an orderly fashion, and the gate to the entrance of the lighthouse was closed. All but one coat, that belonging to Donald MacArthur, were missing. Christmas Day had been and gone, unnoticed and uncelebrated, and the harrowing fate of three keepers, men with wives, children, parents and friends eagerly awaiting their return, was unknown. On the west side of the lighthouse, rope was found strewn across the rocks. Iron railings lining a footpath were broken in several places, and a lifebuoy had been torn from the ropes fastening it to the railings that sat 110 feet above the sea level. "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's," stated the telegram sent by the Captain Harvey on December 26, 1900. "The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs, or drowned." Amongst the most salacious theories directly following the discovery were tales of violent outbursts, murder, and suicide. The most popular antagonist within these narratives was occasional keeper Donald MacArthur, who was said to have had a history of violent tendencies. Rumours abound immediately that a fight had broken out amongst the cabin fever-riddled men, which ultimately ended in the death of one of them. The other two, supposedly in the midst of discarding the body, was said to have been swept out to sea. In a more twisted version of this theory, MacArthur had become deranged in his isolation and had murdered his fellow keepers, disposing of their bodies in the bitter Atlantic Ocean before taking his own life. These rumours were unfounded, yet they are perpetuated even to this day and bolstered by embellishments to the truth that have become accepted as fact. One such example of these embellishments can be found in the keeper's logbook entries. The last written entries to the physical logbook were in fact made on December 13th, not the 15th, as is often reported. Due to lack of reference to these notes being found within the initial reports made by Moore and Harvey, one can infer that they were, rather plainly, nothing more than as simple recordings of the weather conditions, completed daily operations, and the traffic of passing ships. Likewise, the entries made at 9 AM on the 15th of December, found scrawled upon a slate awaiting transfer to the logbook, disclosed nothing of note beyond the morning's weather. This is at odds with later reports of much more sinister findings. In his 1965 book, Invisible Horizons, paranormal author Vincent Gaddis, best known for coining the phrase the Bermuda Triangle in 1964, tentatively revealed a fresh account of the logbook's contents. December 12th. Gale, north by northwest, sea lashed to fury, stormbound 9 PM. Never seen such a storm. Everything shipshape, Ducat irritable. 12 PM. Storm still raging, wind steady, stormbound. Cannot go out. Ship passed sounding foghorn. Could see lights of cabins. Ducat quiet. MacArthur crying. December 13th. Storm continued through night. Wind shifted west by north. Ducat quiet. MacArthur praying. 12 noon. Grey daylight. Me, Ducat, and MacArthur prayed. December 15th. 1 PM. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. Gaddis's sources were weak at best, with him tracing the initial mention of these entries back to a 1929 edition of an American pulp fiction magazine titled True Strange Stories, part of the Bernard McFadden publishing empire of the 1900s. The author of the piece, Ernest Fallon, vaguely cited nameless English sources as the originator of this information, and no mention of these entries could be found prior to Fallon's article. Gaddis himself questioned the validity of these claims, pondering what could have been the mysterious, extraordinary situation that would make strong MacArthur weep. In 1998, a British historian and journalist for the Fortean Times by the name of Mike Dash wrote an article titled The Vanishing Lighthouseman of Eileen Moore. In this article, Dash made cautious mention of these logbook entries and the potential discrepancies within them. There is at least one error, Dash ascertained. The log for 12th of December, in which the entry for 12 PM follows one for 9 PM, which would be incredible in a typically precise nautical log, and suggests either a clumsy hoax or, at best, careless copying, which might put the accuracy of the rest of the information in doubt. Dash also mused upon the peculiarity that the entries to the logbook read like a personal diary or journal, despite the fact that logbooks are not, nor have ever been, anything more than a dry, factual account of the day-to-day workings of the lighthouse and its keepers. These sentiments were echoed by Keith McCloskey in his 2014 book, The Lighthouse, wherein he posed that it is extremely unlikely that Marshall would have written in the official logbook that his superior was irritable. In 2017, Dash came into possession of a copy of the article that had appeared in the 1929 edition of True Strange Stories. After some internet sleuthing, Dash came to the conclusion that Flannan was in fact a pseudonym used by the author John L. Spivak. In his memoirs, Spivak recounts a time early in his career wherein he worked as an editor-turned-writer for True Strange Stories. All I needed for a McFadden true story were a few unusual facts, a name or two, a place or two, and, if possible, a picture to give a semblance of believability. Put plainly, the logbook entries were nothing more than a compelling embellishment of the author, most likely John L. Spivak. A poem written by Wilfred Wilson Gibson in 1912 also added to the more supernatural lore surrounding this already tragic event. Even today, some visitors to the island claim to see 3 abnormally large birds circling the lighthouse, which, for some, gives credence to the notion that the men were taken or disfigured by some otherworldly, unnatural forces. Initial theory was that the men had simply been blown out to sea by violent winds whilst completing their duties outside the lighthouse. This was dismissed, however, within Superintendent Robert Muirhead's report, in which he proposed what came to be the accepted theory at the time. After a careful examination of the place, the railings, ropes, etc., and weighing all the evidence which I could secure, I am of opinion that the most likely explanation of the disappearance of the men is that they had all gone down on the afternoon of Saturday, 15th of December, to the proximity of the West Landing, to secure the box with the mooring ropes, etc., and that an unexpectedly large roller had come up on the island, and a large body of water, going up higher than where they were, and coming down upon them, had swept them away with resistless force. I have considered and discussed the possibility of the men being blown away by the wind, but, as the wind was westerly, I am of the opinion, notwithstanding its great force, that the more probable explanation is that they have been washed away, as had the wind caught them, it would, from its direction, have blown them up the island, and I feel certain that they would have managed to throw themselves down before they had reached the summit or brow of the island. The idea that an unexpectedly large wave or roller had taken the 3 men by surprise is perhaps not too far-fetched. Another lighthouseman by the name of Walter Aldebert served as principal keeper on Eileen Moor between the years of 1953 and 1957. Well aware of the strange circumstances surrounding the disappearance of his predecessors, Aldebert would regularly attempt to photograph the large waves that would collide with the island. During one particularly egregious storm, Aldebert himself claimed to have been almost washed away by a wave that reached him as he crouched against the island's shoulder, almost 200 feet above sea level. As for why the men would have been out on the landing in such volatile conditions, it is believed that Ducat had earlier been fined 5 shillings for allowing damage to occur to equipment at the West Landing during a previous storm. It has therefore been theorized that 2 of the men, perhaps Ducat and Marshall, had left the safety and confines of the lighthouse in order to secure their equipment, and in doing so, avoid another fine. Perhaps the men found themselves in trouble, and the 3rd keeper, MacArthur, rushed out to help them. leaving his coat behind in his haste and inadvertently adding to the enigma of their story. A more recent theory follows a similar rationale. Along the coastline of Eilean Moor are several indented channels in the rock, known as gullies or geos. The west landing of the island is located in one of these gullies and terminates in a cave. During particularly treacherous weather, waves have been known to rush along this trench at great speed. Upon reaching the cave, the wave then explodes upwards, creating a catastrophic rush of water that could prove fatal to anybody found in its path. Perhaps MacArthur saw one such wave approaching and hurried outside to warn his colleagues of the impending disaster, but instead lost his life alongside them. So, what became of the keepers of the Flannan Isle Lighthouse? The truth, we may never know, but one thing is known for certain. 3 men lost their lives that bitter day in December 1900, and their souls were returned to the very ocean upon which they served in life. We seemed to stand for an endless while, though still no word was said. 3 men alive on Flannan Isle, who thought on 3 men dead.